The Dow Jones has hit 30,000 for the first time in history. What does that show, and what should investors do? That's going to be the topic of today's video. Now, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq have hit record highs numerous times this year, but the Dow Jones, which is more traditional companies, has taken a longer time to hit record highs. So in February, the Dow Jones, S&P 500 and all the major kind of US indexes hit record highs, but the Nasdaq hit a record high. I think it was barely 4 or 5 months after the pandemic started. The S&P was a few months later, but it's actually taken the Dow Jones longer to return to its height and indeed break that 30,000 threshold. I would say a few things. Now, number one, don't read too much into this. Markets have always hit record highs historically. Yes, we've talked about an exception in the last video about the Japanese Nikkei, but as I mentioned, dividends is a huge factor into why that market hasn't done as badly as people say it has. So don't get into the habit of thinking, oh, so the market's going to have to fall just because it's hit a record high. And also, let's not forget, this year has probably been, I think, the craziest year, maybe in living memory when it comes to investing. If I would have said to you this time last year that US markets would hit a record high in February 2020, despite the coronavirus going up in Iran and South Korea and China, they would absolutely panic and fall by huge amounts in late February and March. And then they would come back very quickly, especially with the Nasdaq, but the other markets, and hit record highs. They would have a bad October, and then in November, despite a disputed US election and a second European lockdown, they would absolutely soar in value even before the vaccine was released. People would have thought I was absolutely mad, right? So nobody can predict the markets. And this year has shown that once again. Markets are always unpredictable. If we go back to this time 2 years ago, a lot of people have forgotten that actually the US market was going through a smaller downturn. They were going down by 20 to 25%. In January, say January the 1st, 2019, hardly anyone thought the US markets would do well in 2019, for example. They went up by 30%. So people forget this. Last year and this year have been two of the most extraordinary years in the stock market in recent times, but US markets are up by 40% or more. So don't try to predict these things. Some people are trying to say, oh, the Dow's going to do better than the Nasdaq next year because the Nasdaq's more technology companies, the Dow's more traditional firms. That might be true, it might not be true. It's better not to speculate. And you're seeing a lot of extremes now. You're seeing some people say, oh, the vaccines came and the economy is going to get back on its feet, and even though stocks and the economy aren't always linked, we're going to have double-digit years next year. You've got other people saying they think the US market will stagnate and Asia and Europe will do better, and you've got other people who think markets will fall. The point is, just ignore all these things, keep investing, keep being diversified, keep reinvesting your income from dividends, and you'll do fine long term. You won't do fine if you just focus on trying to predict the future. That's never worked, and this year it's never been shown to not work in such an extreme way. So I think people should learn the lessons from this year. But what is amazing is a lot of people actually don't always learn their lessons from these things. I can remember in 2016, I assumed that people who didn't buy the US or global markets because they were petrified of Trump getting into power would learn their lesson in 2020. But then people were afraid for months about if Trump would win, or if he'd lose, or if there's a disputed election, what would happen. So what's funny is, no matter how many times it's shown that you shouldn't try to predict these things and you can't time markets, it's amazing how people actually keep watching some of the same media outlets. I think, as I've said in another video, one of my favorite quotes is from the founder of Forbes that says that in the magazine industry, and indeed in newspapers and whatever, they rely on people's short memories. Because if people just paid attention very carefully to what these publications are saying, they would have realized there would be so many wrong predictions and so many contradictory opinions. But deep down, nobody actually cares because people kind of forget about it. So I think that what will happen is next year, there'll still be people who are trying to kind of trade the market based on the news. But if you can be one of the exceptions who doesn't do that, then you can get ahead basically.